I'm representing the Chamber of Commerce. I'm one of the volunteers, and I have worked the Superman celebration for, I think, 11 or 12 years. I've been going through past pictures of watching my son grow up, helping too, so that's been pretty neat. But I have been given the privilege of sitting with Trina Robbins this morning, and all day today, as a matter of fact. So they've asked me to host her question and answer session. And so I would like to introduce Trina and let her tell you a little about herself.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. So go ahead and tell everyone, in case somebody doesn't know, just a little about your history.
Well, gee, I've been drawing and writing comics since before probably most of you have been born. I see some older people here, so maybe not all of you. I started in the underground. In case you don't know what underground comics are, they were an art movement, basically, of the 60s. Because comics in the 60s, they had this code, the comics code, and that, you know, it limited what they could talk about. But in underground comics, the world was your oyster. You could do whatever you wanted. And so some of them were pretty awful and a little really icky, but some of them were just artistically gorgeous. Let's see, I guess we can fast forward to 1996, when I became, without even knowing it, the first woman to draw Wonder Woman in her own comic book. I wasn't the first woman to draw Wonder Woman, because Ramona Fradon drew Wonder Woman in Super Friends in 1970. But I was the first one to draw her in her own comic book. And it's amazing that, you know, that they waited 40 years before they had a woman draw Wonder Woman. But that was those days. I don't know, I haven't stopped. I did stop drawing. I just, at a certain point, I just became a retired cartoonist, but I'm not a retired writer. I'm still writing like mad. And I tend to write about women who drew comics in the early 20th century, because so many, I got so tired of hearing people say women never drew comics. But the reason that you don't know about all these women who, now a lot of you do know about them because you've read my books, but the reason that you didn't know about these women before is because unless you're written about, you're forgotten. And these women have been forgotten because most of the histories were written by men, the comics histories, and they just wanted to write about Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Spider-Man. So no one knew these women who had been superstars in their day, who were incredible. No one knew that they existed. And I brought some of my books with me. And if you want to go in after this, you can see them. And even maybe buy them if you want to. Or just say hello. How's that?
That's great. So where are you originally from? Because you live in San Francisco now, is that correct?
I grew up in Queens, New York. And I left it as soon as I could. Left it at 18 to live in the village. In 1970, I moved to San Francisco and have not looked back.
Well, in 1970, when you moved there, isn't that, you wrote the first all-woman comic book?
I did. I produced the first all-comic book. I did 2 stories in it, but there were others also. And, you know, it was a new thing. And I would find these women who could draw, and I would say, how would you like to do a comic? And they would go, wow, that's a great idea. You know, because at that point, there were no women in comics. I mean, there had been all these incredible women doing comics, but then comics became completely superhero-oriented, and women are simply not interested in guys punching each other out in outer space. I mean, that's not what we're interested in. So at that point, there were no women drawing comics.
So how, in a male-dominated industry that it was, how were you perceived, especially when you came in, not just being, you know, quiet woman that just drew, that was really trying to help with the movement?
The older guys, who are now, of course, all gone, the older guys, I think they thought I was cute, and I probably was, you know, and they didn't feel threatened by me because they had a status and they knew who they were, and I didn't draw superheroes anyway. So I really got along quite nicely with them. But the guys my age, the underground cartoonists, were incredibly threatened. They were so threatened by me that it was ridiculous. I mean, some of the things they said got back to me, and one of them was that somebody said, "Here comes Trina, hide the knives." I mean, come on. It was so. The result was they didn't really. They would like do comics, and they'd phone up their friends and say, "Hey, I'm doing a comic. You want to contribute 4 pages, 6 pages, whatever." You know, but none of them called me. You know, they really basically hoped I wouldn't exist. So that's why I did it a Me Babe, which was the first all-woman comic, because, you know, they weren't inviting me in.
Well, that is, you know, I've heard several people that have come to visit her today that have used the term pioneer, leader, icon, and it's been funny watching her talk about some of her mentors, but you were definitely all of those terms. How does it feel to be seen like that?
It's kind of funny. I mean, when I think of pioneers, I think of Ticonderoga carriages, those covered wagons, you know. Never been in a covered wagon. Oh, there's Wonder Woman, and she's tattooed.
We do have quite a few people that do dress up as Wonder Woman. So it also said something about you had a long time fascination with Wonder Woman. What was appealing to you about her?
Oh my God. Well, you know, I read Wonder Woman as a kid, and just, you know, beautiful Amazons. That's where I found out about Amazons. I had never heard of Amazons before. And these beautiful warrior women living on an island where no men were allowed. And you have to understand that for you younger people who don't read, you know, who weren't there at the time, that when I was a kid, it's like the whole country was really no women allowed, or at least no girls allowed. I mean, women could be stewardesses, but they couldn't fly the planes. They could be secretaries, but they couldn't be the CEO. They could be nurses, but they couldn't be doctors. So the thought of an island where that was reversed and the men couldn't come in, wow, I loved that. And I loved just the idea of a warrior woman. Woo, wait, what was there not to love?
That is a great answer. I love that. Do we have any questions from anybody in the audience? Yes.
I read an interview with you a couple months back where you talked about you wish you were writing the Wonder Woman comic books at the time you were drawing them, because they took her so far from a feminist into like almost a man-hating, and you didn't really like where they took her story-wise.
Can you say all of that again?
A little more diagonal, yeah.
I read an interview with you a few months ago where you had talked about how you wished you were writing the Wonder Woman comic books as well as doing the artwork, because the men were taking her in such a far direction as far as feminism, almost into like man-hating.
Yes.
What isn't what she is.
Yes, that's right. And, you know, there are people who still, I think, equate feminism with man-hating. And it's ridiculous because it simply isn't true, you know. I mean, that's why those guys were so threatened by me, you know, and said, hide the knives. Yeah, because I understand what she is. And I know that, you know, most of the people who did Wonder Woman, not current Wonder Woman, who I love, but the ones they did after the original writer died, it's like they really had no conception of what Wonder Woman was and should be.
Yeah, and Kristen had talked about that earlier when we were up there at Artist Alley, and I thought that was a very good point and question that she had heard on there. And you were actually going to be a guest on Kristen's virtual, what is it, a virtual fundraiser this September. So they got to meet and talk earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else have
He
a
had
question?
his hand raised.
Yes.
Hi. Sorry, just a really quick question. Hi, Trina. What was your background growing up as far as, did you attend art school? I'm just curious about your earlier, before you decided to become a professional writer and artist.
I was an art school dropout. I think that nowadays, in those days, if they had had classes in comics, if they had taught comics, I would have stayed in. But in those days, they didn't consider comics to be art. And I went to Cooper Union, which is a very prestigious school. But they tend to teach whatever is in fashion. And what was in fashion in those days were gigantic wall-sized abstracts where you throw the paint at the canvas, you know? And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to draw real people on paper. I didn't even know at the time that drawing real people on paper meant comics, but it was what I wanted to do.
Great, thank you for that. We've got a question back here.
Kind of a two-part question. The first one is, how well do you think the lasso of truth is in terms of truth-telling? And then the second question was, what's your take on Gal Gadot's portrayal of Wonder Woman?
I think Gal Gadot made a perfect Wonder Woman. I did not like the second one, the 1980, what was it, 1982? 84. I didn't like that one at all. But the first one was amazing. And she personified Wonder Woman. I mean, when she appears on the screen, you just hold your breath. You know, it's like, oh, there she is. The first one about the lasso of truth. What exactly? What did you say you wanted to know about him?
How much truth-telling can it do?
How much truth-telling can I do, for God's sake? I like the idea of the lasso of truth. And also, originally, it was not just the lasso of truth. Anything that you asked the bound person to do, they had to do. So like in the very, very earliest Wonder Woman comic, when she's given this thing, she lassos one of the Amazons and says, stand on your head. And the Amazon goes, I don't want to do this, but I am compelled to do it. She stands on her head.
Good questions. Anyone else? Yes.
I think I might know the answer, but are you just shocked and amazed at the prices that some certain comic books bring today? Did you ever, at any point, in the 60s and all that, think that could possibly happen?
That what would pass?
Well, that comic books, some certain comic books in certain numbers in great shape commanded thousands of dollars. Did you ever foresee that when you got into the business?
You mean, did I foresee that they were going to be that successful?
Right. Yes.
The fact is that comics were much more successful in the golden age, in the 40s, when they sold millions of copies. Nowadays, for a book to be successful, all it has to sell is about 20,000. You know, they really don't sell as much as they used to. But all those movies, there are people who never read the comics, but they go and see all the superhero movies.
And I think he was even asking about the value that some of those long time,
Right, from the 40s, 50s.
yes,
Oh.
that they're bringing nowadays.
Oh yeah, no, I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. And luckily, most of the old comics I have, I was able to afford back in the days when they were affordable. because I don't even try to find anything affordable nowadays. I mean, the really good golden age ones.
And I will encourage you to come down there and see a lot of her work. She has she sold out very early this morning of the original 1986 comic of Wonder Woman that she drew. She also has a 1971 print that she did. One left of Janis Joplin. And she also has, you've got 2 left of your books that actually won the Eisner Award.
Yes.
So tell us about your award nominations and winnings.
And for those of you who don't know, the Eisners are the Oscars of the comics world. And there was a time when no women got Eisners at all, when all of the Eisners were going to guys who did superheroes. And I was even nominated in those days, but I knew I wasn't going to win, because I never won, because women just, and everything changed. Everything changed around the early days of this century, really. 2013 was the first year. In 2013, I was elected into the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame, and every winner of the Eisners was a woman, and not one superhero won an Eisner. That was when everything changed. It was amazing. And we all took photos with our Eisners. All the women sitting there holding their Eisners, and we all were wearing skirts because we were dressed up for the occasion. So we were all showing our legs, and it looked like a row of geeky chorus girls. It was so cute.
That is amazing, and I wasn't aware of the Hall of Fame, so congratulations on that. She is also signing. People have brought things that they've had collections of. She is signing those, as well as anything you purchase from her, she's signing that as well. But tell me about your nonprofit foundation that you started in, was it 1994, I think? Or you co-founded a nonprofit, Friends of Lulu?
Oh, Friends of Lulu. Yeah, we definitely were nonprofit. I didn't start it. A group of us really, we were the founding mommies. It was in that 94, that's when comics for women were at their worst. It was those were the years of the bad girl comics, which were women who had gigantic breasts and spike-heeled boots, fighting crime in spike-heeled boots, and there was nothing for women. There was nothing for women. So we got a little disgusted, especially because we went to this one convention and they actually had a wet t-shirt contest. So Heidi McDonald, who is a writer and a reporter, a journalist about comics, she printed up a whole bunch of invitations and gave them out at the San Diego Comic Convention. And we all met at this coffee shop in San Diego, this cafe. And it was not just standing room only, but it went out into the street. There were people just standing on the sidewalk because they couldn't fit in, and really it was all about Friends of Lulu was of course named after Little Lulu. And anybody here who has ever read Little Lulu knows that Tubby and the boys had a clubhouse with a big sign in front that said "No girls allowed." And Lulu was always trying to get into that clubhouse. And that was basically how we felt in the industry.
Yeah, and another one that you haven't touched on that people have commissioned her to draw up there today. Please go ahead. She designed the hair and the costume for Vampirella. So tell us a little about that.
I did. I did not design Vampirella. People really get me confused or get confused about me and say, wow, you designed Vampirella? No, I didn't. I just designed her costume. And that was purely by chance. Jim Warren was the original publisher of Vampirella, and I was in his office showing him my portfolio. talking about 1969, I think. And he was very sweet. He is a very sweet man. And he was letting me down very nicely, explaining that I was not ready for prime time. And I wasn't. You know, I was an underground cartoonist. And the phone rang, and it was Frank Frazetta on the other line. And Frazetta was going to do the cover. He had sent sketches of the cover for the first Vampirella. And Jim Warren didn't like the costume. I think that he had simply put her in a red bikini, you know. So Jim was trying to explain to him what he had in mind. And I just grabbed a piece of scrap paper and I sketched the costume out and handed it to him. And he said, just a minute, there's a young lady here who knows what I'm thinking of. And I simply described the costume to Frank Frazetta over the phone. And that's how I designed the costume. And I never met Frank Frazetta in person, ever. I only spoke to him over the phone, but he was very nice over the phone.
Oh, that's neat. That's really interesting. So what other types of roles besides just in the comic industry have you had in activism? And, you know, I loved how you said, you know, feminism does not mean men haters.
Of course. Gosh, I don't know, I became a feminist back in the days when we called it women's liberation. 1968 maybe. And in those days, really, men were so threatened. It was really ridiculous how threatened they were. I remember one comic book artist, mainstream comic artist, a little bit older, who in the same breath, in one breath, he said, oh, those feminists, they're just ugly women who can't get men. And in the next breath, he made a pass at me. I mean, you know, it boggles the mind.
Absolutely. We've had some additional people come up. Does anyone have any questions for Trina? Anyone curious about anything?
Come on, ask me how many cats I have.
Oh, you have a lot of cats?
Actually, only 2.
Oh, okay.
We have had a majority of 3, but right now we're sticking with 2.
Good deal. And I know somebody was asking you earlier about, you know, not just DC, but you've also done work for Marvel and lots of others.
Yes, lots of others. Gosh, I don't know, whoever will publish me. And if it's something I want to do, I do it. Oh, we also have 2 chickens in the backyard.
Are they egg-laying chickens?
Are they what?
Egg-laying chickens.
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Of course they are. But we have grown to love them so much that we, even once they stop laying eggs, we'll keep them because they're just pets.
Oh, that's nice. I had another note that I wanted to ask you about. How about the Adventures of Honey West?
Oh, yeah, that was weird. They printed it in the program. I think they must have taken it off a Wikipedia page or something, because Honey West was a long time ago. Honey West was the early 21st century, but I really did enjoy writing it. I mean, Arlene Francis she just was Honey West. She personified Honey West the same way that Linda Carter personified Wonder Woman. She was excellent. And that was the Honey West. The Honey West that I did, the stories that I did are all retro. They all take place in the 60s, because that's when Honey West was on TV.
Nice. And her nonfiction. You've done a lot of nonfiction work.
Lots and lots of nonfiction. Well, I think I already mentioned that I was so tired of hearing people say that women have never drawn comics, that I've been writing about women who drew comics in the early 20th century, since really the 80s. My first book on that was the 80s, co-written with Cat Ironwood, and after that I started doing them myself. The first one that we did, I urge anyone, if you find it on the internet and you buy it, that's good because it is a collector's item. but don't take it with huge grains of salt. Because when we did that book, we didn't have the internet yet. And a lot of our research was faulty. It's because our sources were faulty. You know, I mean, they even got the names of the hair color of some of these women wrong, you know. But after that, you know, once we had an internet so that you can really do research, the other books, I recommend them.
Well, and yes, come on up.
Sure.
Hi, Trina. So I read you were involved in this 1960s rock scene with the Byrds and Jim Morrison. You had a clothes store for a while, a boutique that served a lot of the rock musicians. So what can you tell us about that and how you got involved in that?
Well, you know, I started making clothes. My father was a tailor, and I learned to sew on his sewing machine. And I started making clothes because I couldn't afford the clothes I wanted. They were just too expensive, and I was always poor. So I started making my own clothes. And after a while, you know, I had so many ideas. And after a while, there's only so many clothes you can fit in your closet. So I started selling them. I would sell them at craft fairs. And I was wearing them on the Sunset Strip to all those, you know, I knew the musicians. They were friends of mine. And I was wearing them to their performances. And people would notice the clothes and, you know, say, will you make something for me? I made 2 dresses for Mama Cass of the Mamas and Papas because she couldn't find anything nice in her size. Nowadays, it would be really a cinch because they make a lot of really gorgeous plus-size dresses. But in those days, there was nothing. Sonny Bono asked me to make clothes for him and Cher, but he said that they had to be exactly alike. And I couldn't deal with zippers, and men's pants have zippers. So I never did wind up making clothes for them. But yeah, I was making clothes for rock stars. It was fun. You can see on YouTube, check out some early Mamas and Papas performances on Ed Sullivan. You can see that Mama Cass is wearing dresses I made. So I moved to New York. I'd been living in LA, and I moved to New York in '66. And it looked like the Lower East Side was like that was the seat of hip, you know. But the clothes in the boutiques were to me, they were very conservative compared to what we were wearing in LA and to what I was making. So I saw a storefront for rent. I think it was $45 a month. I rented the storefront, went back to Los Angeles and brought back my sewing machine and a whole chest full of fabric and just started making clothes, and one of a kinds, you know, because I made them myself, so they weren't all, you know, mass produced. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And people would come in, they would kind of discover me. Like they would come in because it was raining out, you know, they would come in out of the rain, or just because my windows were so interesting. And I made friends. People would just hang out in the store. It was great.
Well, speaking of clothes, we also had a conversation this morning because, showing my age here, how many of you guys remember underoos?
Underoos.
My pair of underoos was Wonder Woman. And we were talking about that, a couple people up at the Artist Alley, and she was like, oh, I loved underoos. And we actually Googled, and they still make them. So we might be looking into some underoos in the future. But yeah, that is really, really neat about the clothes. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Underoos is my holy grail. I'm a thrift shopper. I love thrift shops. And my fantasy is going to a thrift shop and finding already still packaged, still in its package, a pair of underoos in a large girl size. I can wear a large kid size.
Anyone else with a question? Yes?
I have a question. You had mentioned Wonder Woman, and I imagine Little Lulu, but what were your other influences when you first started drawing and writing?
Well, the comics that I read as a kid, of course, Wonder Woman, Little Lulu, also the teen comics, Patsy Walker, Millie the Model, Katie Keene, which I adored. I was never brave enough to send designs into, if you know Katie Keene, you know the readers would send in designs. But as a kid, because they were so well drawn, they were of course redrawn by Bill Wagen, but I didn't know that. I thought this was how the kids had drawn. I thought, oh, they're all so much better than me. So I didn't send anything in, but I made my own paper dolls. I had a brown grocery bag, paper bag, that was so full of my paper dolls that it was like a phone book.
And she actually has some books down there of paper dolls that she's drawn. And you know, I was gonna say that next, of how many people remember paper dolls. I love them. You know, they went from the cutout to the punch out, and but yeah, she's done some great illustrations on those. And you love paper dolls then too.
I love paper dolls. I actually belong to a Facebook group of paper doll fans.
Oh. Now, who would have thought there's even that? There might even be an Underoos group. We might have to check into that.
Oh my God, Underoos.
That might be. Anybody have originals? That's what we could ask them. Anyone else with a question? Anybody else? Is there anything else that you would like to share, Trina?
I think I've shared it all.
Yeah. Very, very.
Lasso of truth.
Lasso of truth. So Trina will be at the Artist Alley, which is the big building beside the red and white Smallville tent. And you just go around to the back of the building and come down there. There's lots of artists down there with great work. And also, one of the books that we sell in the chamber, they're actually doing the Q&A up next. The authors of that book are here, and they're signing that stuff as well. But I would love for you to see some of Trina's work. She'll actually be here till 6 today and 10 to 6 tomorrow, as well as Sunday. So stop in.
When you go to that back door and you knock on the door, you have to say, Clark sent me.
Well, nobody is there to open it for you, so you will have to come on in after you say that. But we'll be listening for that.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you for your time.